everybody. So my name is Tony Tio, and it's a pleasure for me to see you. So good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're joining us. And as I say, this is a very important rendezvous, the most important of the week. And I want all of you to use the hashtag Rendezvous Africa. So overwhelmingly, so you've asked for us to continue the REN21 Rendezvous Africa, and then we work hard to make it happen. So there has been a few change, in between, right? So I used to be, a woman called Rufaro, but now I've changed to become Tony. Obviously, I'm joking, right? I'm joking. But what is not a joke, though, it's the fact that we definitely need to upskill ourselves to push the industry forward in the continent. And I'm actually clearly an example of that. I used to be in the automotive sector, and now I'm moving to renewable energy. And for me to make it happen, I have had to upskill myself. And on a sort of constant basis, I have people reaching out to me, asking me, how can I get involved? How can I get the right skill for me to be involved? How can I make sure that I can actually bring in some innovation, some new thinking into the sector? And this is precisely what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to have a fantastic conversation today. So I'm hoping that you stay with us all the way through. And we have as well some very nice speakers that we're going to be introducing. But I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Laura Williamson, and she's going to be giving you a proper understanding. So what is that we're going to talk about today and introduce our first speaker. So over to you, Laura, please.
Great, thanks, Tony, and hello, everybody. And again, my welcome here from the REN21 Secretariat and the REN21 team. Glad to see that you're joining us again for, as Tony said, the most important rendezvous of the week. For those of you who are new, I just want to set a little bit of the context. As you came in, you heard some music. Tony was sort of chatting about his perspective. We've been putting things in the chat channel. This is all because Rendezvous Africa is about exchange. It's not about a bunch of people, myself, Tony, and the panelists standing up here and talking at you. It is really about a conversation. It's a conversation between all of us on a particular topic. And this one is really sort of the sense of how can we drive innovation to secure the renewable energy transition on the continent. And we've selected the sort of the skills development angle as an entry point because it's flagged as very much necessary and needed on the continent. But how can we move it? That is an important aspect, but how can we move it beyond skills development? How do we actually use the entry point of skills development to drive a local value chain creation, to really drive the innovation potential of the continent? So this is a conversation today. We will start with a lightning talk from Professor Abu Bakr Sambo, and then we'll do a panel discussion, and then it will be open to you, the participants, to come up, ask questions, to engage with the panelists. We also always have a pretty active chat, so please put your conversations, your questions in the chat. We have the team that are going to be tracking those questions and making sure that we try to ask them and answer them on the panel. So the word of the day is interaction. Ask questions. If you don't agree or you have a statement to make your voice heard. This is really what this is about. It's a collective input. And so before I pass the floor over to our lightning speaker, I'd just like to sort of ask you all to just take 10 seconds and think about what does the term skill development mean for you, and just pop it in the chat channel. It doesn't need to be a long sentence, just one or two words. When you hear skill development in the context of Africa, what does that phrase mean for you? And be interesting to see what people are thinking, because so much of this community comes from very different sectors, so we bring different perspectives. So while you're having a little bit of a thought, I'd like to introduce our lightning speaker, which is Professor Abubakar Sambo. He is the lecturer and chair of the Nigerian Member Committee of the World Economic Council. And so please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm very delighted to be at this very important event, which at the end of the day is going to help advance the renewable energy sector of our continent. Can we start with the first one, please? The first slide, no, the first one. Very good. My intention of sharing this slide with participants of this event is to highlight what I believe all of us know, that Africa at the moment is a continent with worse energy poverty, and the highest grade of energy is electricity. So this is showcasing the satellite picture of the world at night, and you see Africa is really a dark continent, unfortunately. The next slide shows the greater detail of what I've just mentioned in terms of the highest energy, electricity. At the moment, the average annual electricity consumption per capita of the world is about 3,000 kilowatt hour. That of sub-Saharan Africa is 1/6 at 500. And if we take electricity access, sub-Saharan Africa is half of the world. But then the whole of Africa is not doing badly. If we take North Africa, there is near 100% access, and South Africa, which is about 94% access. There are countries like Kenya and Ghana, which have 85% access, but that's countries with more than 50% access are just 21, while the majority are having below average, and that's really bad for the continent. If you look at the next slide, you see that the energy source that is most prevalent the world over, that's solar energy. Africa is the most well-endowed continent. And of course, apart from solar radiation, Africa has large quantities of hydropower potential along East and Central Africa. And then we also have large quantities of wind around the coastal areas all around the continent. And there's geothermal high quantity along the East African Rift Valley. And then biomass is in the tropical zone. Now, there are a lot of considerations that have been done over the past. If you look at the next slide, you will see that International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, have done some study, UNESCO, United Nations Education Sector, and surprisingly, International Labour Organization. If you look at the issue of the most critical factor needed, that is the issue of manpower, the issue of skills. Because if you want to design, construct, operate, and maintain any energy system, you need to have skilled personnel. And the earlier we look at this issue, the better. In fact, for our continent to move towards the world averages in terms of electricity consumption per capita and electricity access, we need to do a lot in terms of getting our own African technicians and technologies to be ready with adequate skills. Now, when 2 years ago, the Nigerian Solar Energy Society asked me to give a keynote address on capacity needs in the solar energy sector 2 years ago, I was surprised that data from the internet from ILO 11 years ago, upon a lot of scrutiny and checks with various organizations, the data is not too bad. The solar PV per kilowatt hour, you require between 7 and 11 people, skilled people. Wind power is a lot less for comparison. That of coal and natural gas have been put. Although they don't put hydropower, but another source. And so the hydropower is almost double that of wind power. Now, again, with these figures, we can now move ahead to say the skilled manpower is not just figure. It has more detail, much more detail. If you look, we need to get those skills to produce equipment. We need to get the skilled manpower to do project development. We need skilled manpower to do construction, especially for hydro systems that require construction of dams, and several other skilled organizations. And the details are all spelled out here. And this is the reason why in the energy planning process of some advanced countries, they have a special area they call manpower development, energy manpower development plan. You need to do it, energy manpower development plan. Just you need to do the energy industrial development plan. Now, when we say local production of components within Africa, we're not saying right from scratch. No, it could be simple assembly plans from friendly advanced countries, because when you assemble within the continent, it's going to be a lot cheaper than importing from the country of origin. And that's why we always, in discussions of this type, we look at the issue of local production of components. And this will take me to my last slide. Now, the last slide, I thought I should provoke participants in this meeting to do a lot of thinking, that for African countries to move towards meeting their net zero commitments, and of course that zero commitment is integrating sustainable development goals. Each country should produce its national renewable energy industrial development plan and the twin document of national renewable energy manpower development plan. Like I said, for the latter, you need the artisans, the craftsmen, the technician, the technologist, and the engineer. Then you need the economic planner, you need the energy lawyer, you need the energy investor, and so on and so on. So it's not just hard engineering fields. No, you need the other areas as well. And so the first question that I like to ask is, what is the projection of the demand for modern energy services to meet the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is on energy, and the net zero ambitions of African nations in the next 5, 10, 20, up to 40 years? And one would like to ask the modeling tools, is it one of those available in the international market, or is it one that locals have developed locally? Second question is, what is the detailed skill manpower requirements for meeting the SDGs and net zero ambitions of Africa? How best can the skill manpower be made available in the years to come? The third question is, how best can renewable energy equipment and associated end-use devices be produced within the continent? And like I said, it's not the issue of complete production from scratch. Local assembly is very good enough. The next question is, can the African Union and the African regional blocs like my own ECOWAS or ECAS or the North African group or the Southern African group, can they assign skilled manpower production and the manufacture or assembly of renewable energy power plant and other systems to identified countries within each bloc? Because you can't produce everything in all the 55 countries. Of course, the way we are, some countries are more advanced than others in one area or the other. So that's the meaning of this sharing. And in the spirit of cooperation, which the African Union is almost promoting, I am one of those that believe that it might be possible. The next question is, what is the expected role of the forthcoming African Continental Free Trade Agreement in the marketing of renewable energy components produced in some countries to be acquired by other countries? And the last question is, I'm sure many of the participants in this meeting are aware that competitive proposals for establishment of start-up industries and other ventures on energy transition that have recently been done by the World Energy Council and the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue Group, how can they showcase? They have recently showcased a number of talents and beautiful innovations in renewable energy technologies. How best can such talents and innovations be expanded and nurtured for the benefit of Africa and indeed the world at large? Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor. Really interesting, interesting framing of the the issue at hand. And sort of one of the things that I like from your entry points is, identifying skill development to meet demand. So, linking very much the supply and the demand. I think that often at least in the renewable energy sector, we're a bit guilty of always looking at how do we produce, but not actually matching that to the demand. So what is the demand? What is the need? And then how do we meet that? I want to bring up the other panelists, but before we do that, I'd like you, if you could, to expand a little bit on this, your last, one of your last points about this expanding this concept of skill development, which typically we think of by a technology or we think of by a sector, and actually turning it around and saying, you know, we should really think about it sort of regionally through these economic development mechanisms. How can we use these regional bodies to really drive this local value chain and this sort of innovation from the ground up? What has been, what has been your experience in discussing it and really using this regional approach as an entry point?
Well, what has happened in the past is several meetings of, like in my own case of West Africa. Within West African countries, we want to share things as much as possible with ourselves. And then I've participated in other cross-regional groups organized by both African Union and the World Energy Council. We met to discuss about, for example, the innovative systems of sharing energy in an innovative way, produced in one country to be shared in other countries, and in a very brotherly manner. Every meeting we held, it ends with agreement that that can be done. And recently, we got a boost in this direction from the African Development Bank. Its managing director was in a meeting last October 2021 in Abuja during the retreat for Nigerian ministers. And he called for Nigeria to link up with as many African countries as possible for funding projects jointly, and the project to be executed by Africans. And why I brought the last question is I've been a judge for the World Energy Council on picking innovations from talented Africans on this. And you see beautiful ideas. Most of us that are on our way out in terms of thinking of our years of retirement, we get immediately, we get charged and become very, very much happy that our youths are thinking in very ways that we're not thinking for sharing resources within the country. So I think it will work out at the end of the day.
Yeah, one other point is sort of interesting, and you alluded to this at the beginning, is that, you know, Africa has 6 million people, you know, but they are still, 600 million people living without access to electricity, and the huge potential of the renewable energy sector for providing not only that access, but also, you know, providing the skills and the economic development that goes with it. I think what's really fascinating as well, and a question I'd like to delve into a little bit more when we bring up our panelists is, you know, what is the level of investment that's actually happening in Africa by Africans, in the sense that so much of the investment that's happening is coming from the outside, and that's for a variety of reasons. And, you know, how does that affect, you know, how does that really affect the ability to sort of have this homegrown, if you will, I mean, that sounds a bit, how to develop the skills and the talents from the inside out to these companies when there's so much investment coming from the inside and these pressures from this outside investment with regards to what the skills are that are being used, etc.
Actually, you are right in a way. It's a very disturbing issue you raise, because on the one hand, at the moment, investment, like you correctly mentioned, to Africa in this area we're talking about are more coming from outside. And what has happened in the very recent past is, because of energy transition, of course, the big investors are following the decision at the World Bank and the United Nations. And they decided not to fund even gas projects. But recently, many African countries said, since their net zero target is 2050, 2060, they should be allowed to spend, to get investment funds in gas, which is 40% in terms of emission compared to that of coal. So And then recently, European Union has agreed to that, while African group decided to fund themselves to use the gas to develop their energy systems, and thereafter to plan how to avoid the emissions before the deadline for net zero. So in a way, it is coming. And the African development that I mentioned a little earlier is also trying to gather funds from other sources for development of Africa. And also, in addition, the African Free Trade Continental Agreement is also very serious on this investment issue, because that will launch the path for bringing the items to be developed within specific African countries for the benefit of other African countries. So a lot of discussions are being made in this direction to increase the funding within the continent, and especially to put renewable energy on the front banner of all these discourses.